You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another show of the Catholic education course being taught at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. We, this semester, are teaching about a dozen faculty and staff more about how our faith, our Catholic faith, teaches us to teach others. So it's an excellent opportunity this semester, as this course is happening, to bring in some guest speakers who can teach us about how things are working in the world of education. And so today's speaker is my dear friend Lester Ruiz, who is on the staff of the Association of Theological Schools. He joined in August of 2008, the same year I did my very first accreditation visit. So Lester and I have been together at ATS for the same amount of time, though he actually serves at ATS, and I serve in an ATS accredited member school. Lester is Director of Accreditation and Global Engagement. His work includes facilitating accrediting reviews, providing education and support to member schools about the process of accreditation, and providing staff support to the work of the Board of Commissioners of the ATS Commission on Accrediting. In addition, he focuses on continuing to explore opportunities to build strategic partnerships with theological educators worldwide on behalf of ATS. And it's in that capacity that I've come to know him and to love him as a mentor and as a friend. And as someone, if he calls me up and says, hey, I need somebody to go with me on an accreditation visit next week, can you do it? I usually say yes. Actually, I always say yes, because Lester has an incredible amount, I realize, to teach me on these visits. So before we get started with Lester, we'll ask Dr. Cynthia Trulin-Wilson, who is the Chief Academic Officer at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, to lead in prayer.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you so very much, Cynthia. Lester, welcome. Dr. Ruiz, welcome to our class. Thank you for being here with us today. There you go.
Thank you.
All right. So Lester's going to talk with us today about the use of technology in theological education. And so, Lester, do you have any opening remarks concerning the way in which theological education has been called to use technology within its teaching and learning environments?
Thank you. So one or two things. When Sebastian invited me to participate in this class, I readily accepted, even though my area of expertise is not directly in distance education, but rather in, as he has described already, in matters of accreditation, of which the use of technology and information services are parts. I accepted it because I wanted very much to keep having a conversation with the different theological schools, members of theological schools, because the area, in this particular case, the area of theological, of technology and information services is very important. For a long time it has been, but more recently, as you know, with this COVID-19, the kind of the pivot that was made to distance education in different forms became almost forced all the schools, at least in theological education, in the ATS context, to not only come to terms with it, but also try to find ways to deliver their curriculum in distance education format. As you know, there are some schools that are very deeply skeptical of technology as a primary delivery modality, and so there are some resistance to this. Some refuse to call it still distance education, but prefer to call it remote emergency remote delivery. The assumption underneath all of that is someday we will get back to once the COVID-19 is sufficiently and successfully addressed, then we'll go back to the old ways of teaching. I don't know whether that will happen. That is whether we will go back to that, but I think that this is an opportunity to think more deeply about how we engage faculty, students, schools in delivering the mission of institutions, of educational missions. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have a conversation. So I told Sebastian that I would just like to have a conversation and focus around a number of areas of questions that are important to you, and then we can go from there. So I've done a little bit of preparation in terms of just what we mean by distance education, the different forms that it takes. That's one large area. What's involved in that? What does quality distance education look like? And then how do schools address the question of technology and information services? What's at stake for faculty who are not necessarily used to this kind of delivery modality, and what ATS as an accrediting body understands or expects member schools to attend to with regard to this particular form of education. So those are kind of the areas that I would be comfortable with exploring with you today.
So if I remember some time ago, it was in 2008, ATS formed a technology and theological education group to address these kinds of questions. And over a few-year period, we were able to gather maybe 300 persons in ATS member schools that were engaging in things like, what does it mean to have a technology in the classroom? What does it mean to provide faculty support? Things that made their way into the accrediting visits, especially as schools started to grow in their use of technology, not just for their face-to-face teaching and learning environments, but also for the development and advancement of online programming. So in what I've seen of schools in my visits, the enthusiasm for the use of technology for the purpose of sustaining the institutional mission, and to put that in layman's terms, if some of the schools didn't go online, they were afraid they would go bankrupt. You know, they wouldn't be able to support the financial needs of the school because they didn't have enough people coming physically to their campus. So that led to schools pursuing things in this way. Do you see that theological education has changed in terms of the way in which schools approach their mission, in the way in which schools engage their purpose for existence in the use of these new tools, in the use of new modes of delivery and things like that? Or are the missions still the same? They're just finding different ways to do it.
Okay, so let me sort of answer that in a kind of a roundabout way. What I have observed since, let's say, from 2008, when I joined ATS and now, is that just in terms of ATS institutions that have what they call comprehensive distance education, which is essentially ATS, the way ATS understands distance education, which has to do with, which defines as when a faculty person and the students are engaged in an educational endeavor, but are separated by time and by space. They're not in the same place, and that relationship is mediated by technology or information services, both of those. And that's what ATS understands as quote-unquote distance ed. In order for schools, as you know, prior to the redevelopment and the approval of the 2020 standards, the kind of like the model of the implicit model of theological education was kind of like the residential monastic understanding. Theological education happens when people live together, eat together, like the Theological and other institutions as well that have seminaries that come together, or students live and maybe even faculties. Now that over the years that has actually been challenged, as you know, and distance education has become actually yet another now quite acceptable model of education. And in the new standards, we have this notion of context-specific education / modality-neutral framework or assumptions, which means residential theological education is no longer the privileged form or delivery system or model or modality for theological education. You still need comprehensive distance education approval. There are still expectations around the use of standard, quality devices, technology, etc. All of that is still there, but it is now acceptable without having to justify it, actually, that one can do theological education either residentially, either by distance, etc. Now, let me just sort of, having said that, so the short answer to your question, Sebastian, is that yes, technology, and your school is one example, has now, the use of technology in distance education has become a fairly prominent modality for delivering education without necessarily changing the mission of the institution. But of course, changing the modality, educational modality, actually will have an effect, and we can talk about this, will have an effect on even the way we, not only the mission, but the way we understand the mission. And for some who are more theologically inclined, there are conversations about what I hear from some schools, for example, is some of the objections to distance education and this separation of faculty and students, etc., is that it runs counter to the notion of the incarnation, for example. The notion that the primary framework of our faith is that we are not just sort of floating around, but we are embodied physical, spiritual beings. And so the notion of a residential education, for example, seems to be the more consistent with the theological understanding, for example. I'm not making the argument, I'm just saying that there is that. But let me just, sure, go ahead.
No, I said sure, yeah. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. But what is interesting in terms of distance education is that, so there are a number of dimensions that we might want to talk about, right? So for example, there are what are the tools that are used in distance education is one question. And that's a plurality. So you have tools, correspondence education, for example, which APS does not approve of, is in fact a form of distance education. Right? So the faculty is separated from but correspondence is one. They say that Paul was the first person who did correspondence education. He wrote letters. But in distance ed today, there has been in our history also that part. So there is the print form, and there was a time when radio also was part of distance ed. You don't necessarily think about that now in the U.S., especially because in the U.S. we think, and probably the more advanced countries, we think more about distance education as in terms of internet, web-based education. Whereas if you are in Africa, as you know this, if you are in Asia, other parts of Asia, radio, television, mobile phones, those are all still part of the distance education toolbox. And I mention that because I know, for example, that Holy Apostles has students in other parts of the world where internet services may not be quite as strong and as regular as what we might have here, so in the U.S. So if you have students in a distance education class that are from Africa and from the U.S. and it's web-based, then there's a real disadvantages to distance education. And there are challenges then. I mean, it's a different thing to create a curriculum design for web-based education than it is for mobile phone education. You know that, but I wanted to mention that as some of the complexities of this broad notion of distance education. And then the other aspects, let me just talk a little bit for a moment about the challenges of the delivery modes is that, so there are some distance education modalities that are fixed time. Like this one is it's synchronous, but it's fixed time. But it's, and there's a time difference. I mean, this would be 2 o'clock in the morning in the Philippines, and if you have a student from there, what does that distance, it raises questions, and how do you design a curriculum for people who are still asleep and awake, and that kind of conversation, right? So there's the fixed time kind of distance ed, and then there's also the synchronous and asynchronous. And then there is, I think, and I think this is the future of distance education for me. There is what you call, what one might call the open learning education, which is, as some of you may know, combines a number of modalities, including the hybrid, including face-to-face, but it's free. It's called open learning because even the way the curriculum is designed raises different questions or has different challenges to the role of faculty, to what are needed in order for those things to be successful. But let me, so you have that, I raised this for now so that it can shape our conversations, that distance education has really quite a number of important dimensions that are not always reflected upon, but that we need to, tied to issues of curriculum design, the role of faculty, etc., those kinds of things.
So an example of being able to reach other communities in far places. I have a picture that I just happened to have queued up. When you said that, I grabbed it. This is a cohort of students in the archeparchy of Asmara, Eritrea. we have, at Holy Apostles, have provided full scholarships to 65 priests, religious sisters, and lay ministers over the past 5 years. We started with them in the spring of 2015, and we are on cohort 5. They've done all of their work through this computer lab that was funded by Pope Francis, and some of them have computers back at their religious houses for those who are religious priests. And we've managed to graduate over 50 of the 65 so far, and the remainder are still within the pipeline. Some will graduate, probably about half of those will graduate this spring, and then the other half next spring. And if no more students come, because we've pretty much educated their entire curia, then we will have provided advanced degrees. Now, there was a reason why we did this, and that is the government of Eritrea is a Marxist, is run as a Marxist dictatorship, and the dictator, according to our bishop, who is in Asmara, the arch-eparch or the metropolitan, he said that the dictator will not allow men under the age of 50 to leave the country. He says they're a flight risk if they do, unless they serve their 1-year obligatory military service. Well, these guys are priests. They do not want to serve 1 year of obligatory military service. So the only way that they could have received the education is if it came from outside to them in this way. And we happen to be standing in the same spot the arch-eparch was standing in at the same time by an act of providence that led to this collaboration. Cynthia Tulin is our academic dean of online learning, and she is also the chief academic officer who has worked with this community for the past 5 years. Cynthia, do you want to say anything about them?
Yeah, I'm impressed with their dedication. They really, overall, seem to really appreciate the fact that they're getting a good education from us in theology and some in philosophy and pastoral studies. They've been very devoted and really tried very hard, which, of course, also the language, even though some of them, they speak English, but they don't speak English the way we do, so there's always that kind of issue in trying to transmit and receive information. But I do think that the real problem that we've had more than anything is the technology, because we have had to send books, and try to get them to the students. Sometimes they don't get the books for a month after the class has started. So the technology, if I had it to do over, knowing what I know now, I would have done some different things technologically in my classes. But, that's hindsight. But I think that was the major issue that we had, was the technology, that they don't have good internet. They don't have, the ability to really get a lot of the things that we do here in the internet.
Right. So, take for instance, recently the government forbid YouTube. So, any faculty member that was using YouTube, this recording will be on YouTube, they won't have access to it. So, I had to go through and we converted the YouTube videos into MP3 files that we could email, or that they could access in some other way. So, just changing the mode of something that was not available to them, but that was required for the class. They're 8 hours away from us in the future. And 8 hours away from us in time zones. So that makes synchronicity difficult. And then if you consider that they have to download things at roughly the speed of whatever the slowest line is, it could take them a very long time to download a file that for us takes just seconds. So these are the issues that we've dealt with, but we've successfully dealt with them in over 50 students who've graduated from our program, and we're continuing to successfully deal with them.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's also been a tremendous eye-opener, I think, for our faculty because, of course, we live here, and most of us live in the United States, where we make rumblings about religious freedom being threatened. But dealing with a country where, one of my students was in a coffee shop and just disappeared. He was put into the Army. We had one student, I emailed Sebastian, I said, I haven't gotten any homework in a while, should I just give her F's? And he said, well, let's wait and see make sure she hasn't been killed. I mean, this is, to me, like going back 2,000 years, to Rome, and to realize that exists now in our time has been such an eye-opener for me as a Catholic. So it's, they're afraid of their government. They try very hard to serve their church, and yet some of them are really at risk of suffering serious problems because of that. It's a real eye-opener, I think, for many of us.
Claire, I was going to give Claire the opportunity to say something about resources. Okay.
Sure.
Do you have anything that you'd like to add about resourcing this group?
Absolutely. You all talked about the modes of delivery. I tried so many ways, and it turns out that the best mode of delivery has been downloading documents and sending them as email attachments and sending multiple emails, because if you send too much at one time, then they have more trouble. We've also had some kind of real-time, I guess I would say chat, but email communications, especially, when we're doing their tutorials and doing research. That's really the only way that we could do that, by having a shared point of view in terms of what they actually need. So I really do feel like we're supporting them as best as we can. I know Sebastian has been wonderful in trying to provide library materials to them. So even if they arrive late, which they always do, I think we've learned by now that, you start in September so they can get their January books if they actually need a physical book. But we do send chapters, and then we make sure that we do have the integrity of copyright rules, because they would apply. So we'll destroy copies that we send. We ask them to destroy them once the books arrive, and then they make whatever they can within their copyright rules or our copyright rules, because in a sense we govern that copyright requirements, even if it is another country. So we are trying. We're trying to be flexible as we can in order to support, because that's really our goal, to give support, the tools that the students need so they can achieve their goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
So let me, at this point, just so I think we can have a much more robust conversation, let me take off my ATS hat, so that I'm not evaluating your programs. When we talk, let's set that aside. Let's talk as theological educators. And what I want to do is kind of like share with you some of the insights that I have received, not just from my own experience with distance education, but also from my experience with the ways that institutions outside of North America have dealt with distance education. And I'll raise some of these concerns with you, and then let's see if, because there are issues about, the main thing is that there are a number of things that have been identified as what one might call the conditions for success in distance education in general. One of and then let's use the students and this class as a kind of, let's see if there are some issues that we can deal with. So one of the things that they found out that in studies is that distance education students tend to be, and programs tend to be learner-centered. and that some in the developing countries have noticed that those who participated in or have their education in terms of distance or online education actually are more successful. They're more successful because the structure of distance education is such that it allows them to, or requires of them to be more self-directed.
Mm-hmm.
Self-directed in that they have to discipline themselves to say, I have to get up, I have to study this, I have to do this. I cannot wait for going to the campus. I cannot even wait for the books that are late. I need to do something. So it creates, the distance education ethos creates, particularly online education, creates this not only student learning centeredness, but also student initiative, right? So that's one. Have you found that to be true with your students?
With some of them, not with all. Yeah, but yeah. There are quite a few, especially as they've been here for a while. So maybe when they first come, they're kind of looking for us to hold their hands, but that passes within a year.
Mm-hmm. And is it partly because of the distance education?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's one. So what's happening to the student, I think, is one important element, and I'm glad to hear that. The other has to do with the course design. So it seems to me, one of my observations would be, not just in your case, but in other cases too, that synchronous distance education cannot survive on its own. That it seems to me there has to be some kind of asynchronous aspect to it, so that, for example, the challenge of books arriving late, quote unquote late, gets adjusted by the way that the curriculum gets designed, right? So faculty don't have to, the synchronous aspect does not always have to be the main feature of, for example, distance ed. And happily, ATS actually, in terms of accreditation now, has acknowledged that asynchronous and synchronous modalities need to sort of be together, because otherwise we will all be exhausted from synchronous education, right? Zoom fatigue is another way they call it, but can you imagine other kinds of fatigue based on that we have to meet, quote unquote, face to face in real time all the time. And so before 2020, that was an issue in ATS, because then the modality was, no, we have to make sure that they're all together and in real time. So the technology was adjusted to real time, and so we have some people who have to wake up at 3 a.m. Instead of having the regular kind of thing. So have you? What are some of the ways in your curriculum or your course design that you've accommodated that kind of combination? Are you doing that? Are you thinking about it, or what are some of the challenges?
I can answer for me, and that is, and then Cynthia has a broader picture of the of what's happening throughout the remainder of the online program. But this particular model that I'm advancing this semester has these live lectures on Monday. And the Monday lecture sets the tone for the week. Over the course of the week, the people who are studying within the class, the students who are faculty and staff, at least in this particular course, will move through the readings, any other materials that I post, and then we'll engage one another on discussion boards. Eventually, in coming quite soon, we'll start working on our semester project together. And the semester project is the redevelopment of a particular course to make it more relational, to make it more proactively engaging, to provide more media richness. the kinds of things that will carry our online program into the 2020s, the third decade of the third millennium, and build upon the original program design was built in 2012, 2013. Which was still a very asynchronous, static model of move from one lesson to the next, and engage heavily in discussion boards on your way. So this is one thing. If I have guest speakers come to a class, attendance is always optional because I understand time zones are different. I understand schedules are different. I'll take the video and I'll post it in the classroom. And I'll ask those who did not attend or were not able to attend for one reason or another to watch it after the fact. And then, make some comments. They've got room there on a discussion board to integrate whatever it is that they're learning from within the session into their response for the week or their responses. Cynthia, have you seen other things happening?
Not to any great extent. Certainly there are people who videotape or audio tape their lectures for the students. The only time that we really get together is if we're doing comprehensive exams or if we're doing thesis defenses. But as Sebastian mentioned, we're still very much tied to the idea of you have to move through theological education step by step. There's no question of that. But how we do it at this point is here is the information, whether we're giving lectures or also having them read. PowerPoints, that sort of thing, and then having interaction on the discussion board, first where they post something and then where they respond to each other and the professor also responds. So, but that is something that we're in the process of changing. Of course, to change things, you have to know how to do that. And I mean, even this is only the third week, I think, of this class, right? And I mean, already I've seen things that we can do to improve and that we can share with the faculty. So Jenna Rell, the director of online learning, she's in this class also. And it's like, I'm really excited to come up with, come to the faculty with these ideas, those who haven't attended, and get us on the move again. So.
What have you seen, Lester? As you know, the United States government, the United States Department of Education, it has distributed what they call a Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund grants. So they gave many of our theological schools $500,000 each to help us over the hump of COVID-19. And there are a number of different categories in which we can spend it. One of which is the redevelopment of online learning for faculty and staff training. And Holy Apostles has applied for one and received confirmation that they're going to give us, they've already given us $22,000 of it in two previous grants, and this next one is going to be $477,000. We're able to apply a good amount of that to the redevelopment of our courses. Mm-hmm. And on the ATS Engaged, a lot of the other schools are starting to post that they've received their award letters or they've received their money, and they're going to do something very similar. This could lead across the breadth of ATS member schools to a technological revolution in terms of the redevelopment and redesign of how programming works in a post-COVID era. Have you noticed anything like that in your conversations with other schools?
Well, it's uneven. There are some schools that are, a little bit ahead in terms of because of their either that they have a larger resource base or that they've been doing it for a while, or that there's not very much resistance for distance test, for example. So it's uneven. One of the interesting places, for example, that you might know is Harvard Divinity School and the university have essentially stood for, we're not really convinced about distance education, but as a result of the COVID 19 situation, they built their distance education infrastructure. They have a website that if you go to, I mean, it's pretty sophisticated. It's pretty robust. It combines both synchronous and asynchronous kinds of things. It looks at resources. It looks at curriculum design. And one can actually see what's going on and can actually lift from that. So I mentioned that as a resource. But I think that some of the larger challenges of shifting to so let me backtrack for a moment. As far as ATS and the Department of Education is concerned, the number one principle for distance education is simply regular and substantive interaction. That's the most important principle that one has to that schools need to make sure they're able to demonstrate. The U.S. Department of Education released their final guidelines. They're now the final guidelines for distance education, and so they kept for example, they underscored the regular and substantive interaction. They listed a number of let me see if I have a number of ways that schools could demonstrate this regular and substantive interaction. So I'm looking at my notes, for example. So one of those is the need for schools to, this is from their guidelines, to clearly define what regular substantive interaction is. Provide the guidelines also provide flexibility now to modify curriculum. And this is not just the emergency remote education anymore. All of these new guidelines will go into effect in July 2021. Before then, the emergency guidelines, which are more or less similar, are in place. So now is the time, really, as far as U.S. Department of Education is concerned, to sort of do look at the curriculum, all of that, from the standpoint of regular and substantive interaction, because there are less strictures now that are in place. It also the issue of credit hours, still the same. It didn't change, for example. But then there was some debate about the difference between clock hours, for example, and credit hours. And the clock hours, as you know, is you have to tell exactly how many hours you were in your class or something like that, instead of credit hour, which means this is worth X amount of courses. So the U.S. Department of Education originally moved to the clock hours, but then moved back and said, no, we'll stay with the credit hour. So that's another area of flexibility. I can't find the, let me see, yeah, so here, for example, regular and substantive interaction means that the schools does in fact provide direct instruction still, right? So what you're doing that, right?
Sure.
So there's direct instruction, there's feedback on coursework. You have to demonstrate that there is feedback on coursework, and that you respond to questions about course content. Facilitate group discussion about content. Engage in other instructional activities the institutions or programs accreditor has approved. And it says in their guidelines that the schools have to demonstrate at least 2 of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So that's pretty good. It doesn't say you have to do all of this. It doesn't say you have to do it in this way. but it says you need to make sure that your course design, your course delivery provides direct instruction, etc. So this is this gives, I think, a lot of flexibility to online. And the reason for this conformity to the expectations of USDE is to ensure that you are still eligible for Title IV. So if you're following this, then, or you're conforming to several of these, then you are still eligible for Title IV, which is a little bit different from before, where you had to demonstrate certain things. So I mentioned this as a way of indicating that from the standpoint of either accreditation or regulations, I think part of what has happened with regard to this COVID-19 is that it has opened the way to a more flexible distance education approach to education.
It's another demonstration of how God always brings good out of evil. This was just promulgated on September 2nd, so this is only a few days old. This is 5 days old. So thank you for sharing this. I'll post a link. I just found it. And regulations are effective July 1st, 2021, as you said. So what I see is this, and let me know if how far off you think I am. In the late 80s and early 90s, we began to shift in terms of our assessment structures from resource-based assessment, how many faculty do you have, do they all have advanced degrees, how many books are there in the library, that kind of thing, to outcomes-based assessment. Are you achieving the outcomes that you're claiming, on the course level, and can you map those outcomes all the way to the mission statement even, do they promote the concentration level outcomes, or are they aligned with the program level outcomes, and so on? So what I can see is a gradual move, because we still have resource-based assessment structures and educational structures with us. Take, for instance, that definition of the clock hour, or that definition of the credit hour based on the Carnegie unit. You have to have at least 112.5 hours of engagement, 37.5 of which have to be direct faculty engagement, the other 75 of homework, for it to be considered a 3-credit course. Well, that's a remnant of resource. If you really wanted to do outcomes-based assessment, can you just demonstrate that the students have met the outcomes of the course, for instance? And which is what's happening, I think, in a lot of the competency-based programs that are starting to develop or have developed, where students demonstrate competencies, and based on those demonstrations, they're able to be awarded credit or degrees or certificates or whatever. Do you see, especially with ATS itself, in 2012, the residency requirement was dropped for purely academic programs, the MA in Theology and the MA in Philosophy, for instance. And that's how Holy Apostles was able to successfully apply for first associate membership, and then candidacy, and then initial membership in the Association of Theological Schools. Because we happen to have two 100% online MA programs since 1998. I mean, we never qualified because of that. After 2012, things changed. After 2020, suddenly we're able to have a MAPS program, a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies, 100% online, which ATS approved in 2018 contingent upon a report. But fortunately, now that it is within the new standards that were promulgated on July 1st, we received a nice letter from Christopher Tay saying that we no longer had to do that report because we didn't have to demonstrate that we qualified for the exception, since there's no more exception. Same thing with an MDiv program. If we wanted to move forward with a 100% online MDiv program, under the ATS standards, we could. There are some challenges to that with our association with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Program of Priestly Formation, but it's not impossible. It's just addressing those very legitimate challenges to the idea that that would be the next step for us if we wanted to move in that direction. So do we see a transformation, if there is a transformation, in the way assessment is done, in the way a program demonstrates its viability? Do you think we'll see transformations in the programs themselves, in terms of their mission, in terms of their outreach, in terms of our having a more global approach to what we do as theological educators?
I would hope that, and this is where I kind of like appeal to your vocations as theological educators, because the way I understand, there are some external factors that prevent one or a school, the theological educators, to deliver a program. There are constraints like what you just described, Sebastian, right? But in fact, if you really look at your curriculum and if you're really thinking about what it means to fulfill your mission as an institution, you probably are thinking about global reach. You're probably thinking about ensuring that there is access, but you're also thinking about quality, that you want your students to and your graduates to demonstrate quality in their education, right? And so for me, that's actually what that quality is going to be would really depend on you as theological educators. So for me, for example, a Master of Arts in Theological Studies, because of my understanding, my theological understanding, requires that it include, even if it's an academic degree, for example, that it requires some kind of formation, some kind of forming of the person, right? In terms of, for example, in terms of the PPF, that you know, I think that's a pretty, however it is interpreted, I think the dimensions of formation are quite important. Now, then I would ask, okay, so what does, as a theological educator, what does an online delivery look like that is hospitable to the forming of people, without necessarily referring to the residential aspect of it, right? So for me, that depends on you. I think what will change our or no, let me put it not what will change, but what will be required, I think, would be a clear understanding of what does an MATS degree look like in terms of its characteristics as a, in terms of outcomes, for example. What does an MATS degree look like? In the ATS context now, only the PhD has a residency requirement. But having said that, it still requires that the schools demonstrate that in their distance education, in the comprehensive distance education programs, that they're able to make sure that they have a robust assessment structure and process, that their technology is adequate, that some of the issues that you've raised about the lateness of books, etc., for example, or the resources, questions about support, not only about support of the students, but also support of the faculty and training of faculty, for example. Still there's but those, and while ATS, for example, will not say you have to train folks in X, Y, and Z. Well, it will not say that now. It will say, in your context, what does a good faculty person teaching distance education look like? What kinds of competencies or skills does that person have? Do they have support? Do they have curriculum designers that assist in designing distance education curriculum, do they understand the difference between distance ed and quote unquote in-person face-to-face education? But those items are part of your own vocation already. So Sebastian, I don't know whether it will. I can only answer philosophically to say that modality shapes, any use of a particular tool will shape somebody's philosophical understanding, somebody's values, right? And vice versa. In other words, technology for me is not just a tool. It has a cultural code with it as well. So one of the things, for example, when I was attending the seminar for distance education in the ASEAN countries, the ASEAN countries in Asia have insisted now that all schools must make sure that their programs in distance ed are comparable. So they're talking about what does this look like, right? Precisely because of the technological divide, the IT divide, their LMS is what they call stick LMS, because they're, instead of this big LMS infrastructures that big schools have, they've tried to adjust it in such a way that they have everything in a stick, in that what you call this, I don't know how it works, but they keep on saying everything that we need is here in this stick. So the school prepares that stick, the flash drive, and make sure that it's they have the modules prepared, that in there they put in the study guides, they have lists of online, and all that the person needs to do is to stick the flash drive into their computer if they have a computer, and so they call that the stick LMS. And it's a helpful tool for those who have low level technological resources. So instead of using email only, and I'm not making a criticism, but instead of email only, you can use that too, but you can maybe develop a different kind of LMS, like the stick LMS, as a way to, but that requires a different role of the faculty, right? I mean, we have to be, as faculty, we'll have to be thinking about, now they have to prepare this module. It's not just the syllabus. You have to take your lecture and maybe divide it up. You have to schedule it. It requires really kind of like hard work, shifting understandings of the role of faculty. We have some faculty who will say, I am the content specialist, so don't ask me to design the course. Okay, so we have that in ATS now. In our accrediting process, we have moved to Canvas as our default LMS for accrediting. And we are asked, we used to say, those of us who are accredited say, well, we have the designers, you can design that and you just tell us what to do. We are the accreditors, right? But now we are asked to also think like designers. But it's a different role, and I'm ready to retire because I don't want to learn how to be a designer. Because that, but that's the challenge. I use it as an illustration of how that will shape the future of theological education. If you go in that direction, there will be changes in faculty understanding as well.
Well, I've seen that. I've seen that in terms of professional skills and meta-professional skills. So it used to be that a faculty member to have professional skills would come in knowing how to do research within his or her discipline, would know how to articulate a concept to a group. those kinds of things. But then all these meta-professional skills, like how do you integrate something on a learning management system, for instance, or how do you write a syllabus and then break down based on mode of delivery differences in the way that you're going to do something. And that's the design role, that you have an instructional designer or somebody that you pair with the faculty member to go through them on how to do it. And then maybe the faculty member gets it, maybe the faculty member needs that kind of support for the remainder of his or her career. We did have a question. Sister Angela Ann Zukowski is here with us today. She's the author, by the way, of The Gospel in Cyberspace and one of our speakers later in the semester. So thank you, Sister Angela Ann, for being here. She wrote, how do you get the stick element into countries that may not allow books or foreign resources into the country? It cannot come in via postal service, Amazon, etc. So it's a question. In my case, I wrote her back. I said virtual sticks. This is a physical thing. You don't really need a physical stick in today's world. You can create a virtual widget and slide it through some technological way. But in my case, I used to get things into Eritrea by working with the ambassador, the German ambassador to Eritrea. So we would send books to his residence in Bonn, and then his wife would, or he would diplomatic pouch them to his wife in Asmara, who would then walk them over to the bishop. And we got 300 books or so in using that method. And the stick was one way we did several years ago when we needed to implement a new technology that was too big for them to download on their server. So we put it on a stick and sent it in that way.
Sebastian, that's really interesting. I'll talk more about this in my presentation, but because our program at the University of Dayton is a little bit diverse than what we're talking about, but very inclusive. There are just some parts of the world. We work in apostolic vicariate of Southern and Northern Arabia, and getting anything into those parts of the world is, and even working with Lebanon and Syria, and even Turkey. Some things are just very difficult. If we have everything online, if everything is online as e-documents, that's really helpful. I work very hard with publishers, and I think you all probably are aware of this, trying to get publishers to put their books as ebooks. That's one thing, but also getting asking them to support our when we get a grant to translate texts into their language, to give us permission without charging us $1 million to translate the text is another thing. So that has been a constant. It's been a challenge, but we've managed to work through some of it sometimes. But those are some of the international issues we face daily.
Sure.
I would just say that yes, the I just call it the IT divide, and the unevenness of the world is such that there's not one way to address the stick LMS is only one piece, right? But if I was as a theological educator, what I would my response to these difficulties is to see whether I can design a curriculum or a course, whatever, that allows for in a sense less than instantaneous response, so that an asynchronous and a synchronous approach can be melded together, so that so for example, but that requires planning my curriculum, let's say the MATS, instead of it being a 3-credit course for 15 weeks, will be 1 year, but calibrated so that you can allow this quote unquote the distribution system to catch up with a course, rather than trying to get around always the slowness of the quote unquote the distribution system. So but that's why actually for me what I'm trying to think through is this notion of the open learning approach rather than the strict distance ed that has certain constraints to it, like what we've talked about. But that's several steps down the road. I mean, that's not always acceptable yet. And I think that, for example, governments and quality assurance agencies are not yet prepared to fully embrace this, because it raises questions about comparability. It raises questions about quality, quote unquote quality. But as the example of Eritrea and other parts of Africa, same thing in Asia, for example, the seminary in the border of Myanmar and that part of the world where the seminaries there, in order to get there, they don't have strong internet. You have to actually go there. You have to take a bus first, and then walk, and then bus again. When you get there, their library, my home library is larger than their library. But they have the commitment, the intelligence, the desire to be educated. How do you deliver education in that kind of context, right? So
that's really helpful. I mean, I'm sorry but this particular topic is very important to me because we are very international with our courses.
Yes.
And we strive very much to be as indigenous as possible. And therefore, it's also the partnering either with Episcopal conferences or college or universities, whether, because we're in Latin America with Lebanon, to when we design our curriculum, how then to adjust, because we don't take our English curriculum and just translate it into Arabic or translate it into Spanish, or we're moving into French. It's not just translating those into those languages, because that's, we know that as academics, that's just not what you do. But then finding those people in those various cultural contexts who understand what our competency requirements are, and or how they can be adjusted or adapted to their context to meet our requirements. That's really a challenge. Now, we've been very fortunate to have growing partnerships in that area, but it really takes a lot of time.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Partnerships. They're relationships. Relationships take time.
Right. Thank you.
You pointed this out in your book, by the way, Gospel in Cyberspace.
Yeah. That was a long time ago, and we're still talking about it. There are times when I think I'm the new ancient one in this whole world.
Oh, God bless us. A good takeaway is that quote from Marshall McLuhan that Lester referred to earlier when he said that, and I'll summarize what Marshall said. He said, first, our technologies ape us, and then they shape us.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think if we were to look in the 2020s, I keep saying 1920s, in the 2020s, we have an opportunity, this group, to shape the way online learning will occur and transform it forever, depending upon what we do next. And I think it's an exciting time to be alive.
Yes. So a confession to make, right? One of the reasons why I insisted way back that when the Holy Apostles applied for ATS membership, candidacy, etc. I had thought and felt then that kinds of things that you were doing, the identity of the institution itself, and the history of the institution that was very attentive to those who were not always in the mainstream of of education, the commitment to some kind of global engagement. I thought that was your way ahead, actually, in terms of your understanding of what theological education ought to look like. And 8 years, 10 years later, I close to my retirement, I'm happy to say I was right with my intuition that, so I say that as a way to encourage you, and especially in the kinds of things that you're doing, because in my understanding, there is a trend in distance education that is very high. Let me just put it in a metaphor, that there is a Cadillac form of distance ed. And that the question I keep on thinking about is, do we really need a Cadillac version of the distance education, for example, or can we live with a Volkswagen? And my intuition and my own sense of connection with coming from the global South is that it would be nice to have a Cadillac version, but I think quality education is not tied to a Cadillac version. But quality education is tied to values. It's tied to commitments that are not necessarily connected with the Cadillac. And I don't want to apologize for that. I keep reminding my colleagues whenever I have an opportunity that, why don't we develop an understanding of distance ed that allows us to make sure that we are context specific and that it is sustainable, and that our footprint, our ecological footprint is not so huge or so large that it excludes others, or that there's no space for others to participate in it, because it's such a huge footprint. When it requires so much, it's high intensive, quote unquote, energy. When I talk energy, like, electricity or whatever it is, right? So those are some of the questions, and I feel that as you wrestle with these questions, you are already asking these questions, and I'm glad that I sense that you're not dazzled by the Cadillac, but you're very clear about what you want to do, including such things as, Sebastian, as you described it, sending books to the ambassador, the German ambassador. I mean, that's a nice workaround, right? To the trying to, buy computers for your students, making it a requirement that all of them have computers, when in fact their energy infrastructure is so low, but focusing on that as the marker of quality for education, to me, is seriously problematic. So anyway, I just wanted to offer that kind of encouragement, because I think you're doing the right things that we need. All of us in the ATS context need to hear about. So.
Well, this will be posted on the Holy Apostles' very own TV station, WCAT TV. So feel free
I might lose my job already. I might lose my job with my ATS colleagues now.
I know a German ambassador who can always use an assistant.
Okay.
Well, Lester, thank you so very much for being with us today on Labor Day, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience. and your enthusiasm and your spirit with us. It's a real gift for you to be here today. Do we have somebody who'd like to close us in prayer? Sister Angela Ann?
Thank you. Let us pause for just a second and recall the wonderful presence of our God in our midst. Let us ask God's blessing on our world, of those in so many different parts of the world that are suffering so many different kinds of illnesses or torture, oppression. May they be touched by those who have open minds and open hearts, who live the Beatitudes and gospel values, to truly strive to be a world of humanity that respects the human dignity of all persons. And may our work as religious educators always touch the minds and hearts of our students to awaken them to a new way of being in our world today, that they will be the prophetic voices that we strive to cultivate for creating a new world order into the future. We ask this through our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Angela Ann.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
To a production of WCAT Radio, please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.